This was once the center of an empire. From Kandahar just over 200 years ago, Ahmad Shah Baba ruled not only Afghanistan, but all of India and half of Iran. But here, at the hub of Central Asia, the Middle East, and the Indian subcontinent, imperial glory was to be short-lived. The great civilizations that have met and mingled in Afghanistan and enriched its culture have never allowed it to obstruct their own imperial designs. The long list of Afghanistan's invaders stretches back to Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan. The Afghans have never allowed themselves to be colonized, but they and their land bear the scars of war. The scars that Kandahar bears today were left by the most recent invader, the Soviet Union. For 10 years, from 1979, Afghanistan was devastated. 1.5 million Afghans were killed, another 1 million maimed, 6 million went into exile to become the largest refugee population in the world. Such are the odds against which a new struggle is beginning, a jihad to rebuild Afghanistan. Before the war, this was already one of the world's poorest countries. The conflict halted its tentative moves towards economic development. This is a textile factory which never went into production. Most of the machinery is installed. Some was never unpacked. The plant stands idle, coated with dust, an eerie memorial of a war from which Afghans believe the world benefited, but of which they have been left to pay the cost. When the Soviet occupation ended, the infrastructure was in ruins. Nearly 80% of schools had been destroyed. The refugees who've returned in their hundreds of thousands are at risk from millions of unexploded mines. Reconstruction must begin with the very basic elements of infrastructure: power supplies, roads, bridges, schools. In some irrigation canals, water hadn't flowed for 14 years because during the war, essential repairs had to be neglected. Over 30% of the fragile water systems evolved over centuries were either damaged by bombing or fell into serious disrepair. This is a critical problem in a country where nearly half the important crops are grown under irrigation. Repair of the canals, wells and channels is essential for the rehabilitation of agriculture. Getting this canal back into operation was one of the major reconstruction projects of the Afghan Development Association, a non-governmental organization established in 1990 to work with the Afghan people on the revival and development of the rural economy. ADA began its work in the refugee camps in Pakistan, where 3.5 million Afghans had to live out the war on charity and a monthly food allowance. The establishment of programs for income generation and vocational training provided them with skills that they could use on their return, but also ensured that they wouldn't be psychologically debilitated by exile. It helped to preserve their capacity for self-reliance. The only projects continuing in the camps today are self-sufficient, income-generating ones, like this leatherwork operation in Haripur. The emphasis on self-reliance is central to ADA's development philosophy. Handouts are necessary in a crisis. They're not the way for a people to escape from poverty. Some observers had predicted that the Afghan refugees would never return home. But they were wrong. After the collapse of the communist regime in Kabul in 1992, they rushed in their hundreds of thousands to avail of the small UN repatriation grant, change their savings into Afghan currency, and load up their belongings for the journey home. Though a deadly and destructive civil war continued in the Kabul area, the refugees knew that in most of the countryside the conflict was over. The return to the family home, to the land some of them hadn't seen for 14 years, was to be delayed no longer. At one stage in the summer of 1992, the refugees were heading for the Khyber Pass and the main border crossing to Afghanistan at the rate of 100,000 a week. Warnings of difficulty and danger were of no avail. The border signs still said welcome, but the returning refugees were left with few doubts about the magnitude of the challenge they faced. On all sides were the signs that this is not yet a country at peace, and the debris of the years of war. The road to the eastern town of Jalalabad is littered with burned-out Soviet tanks. Not a single telephone or electricity pole is left standing. No building is intact. As the returning people began to build a life in this devastation, ADA shifted its effort from refugee relief first to rehabilitation, repairing the damage of war, then gradually to community development. The ultimate aim was to empower people to organize themselves and meet their own development needs. ADA spent 6 months surveying 11 districts, identifying community problems, and singling out key projects for urgent attention. Poverty is a complex issue. In many countries, well-intentioned efforts to fight it have made the poor poorer and the rich richer. ADA is determined to avoid the mistakes of imposing on people solutions that don't meet their real needs. From the beginning, it was decided to involve the community in every stage of these projects, from planning through to final implementation. The projects must be the people's own work. Their involvement, their pride in what's achieved, will ensure that the work continues long after ADA's role is finished and becomes the basis for sustained development by the community. The effort required is considerable, from making the wire and stone gabions that shore up the sides of the canals to cleaning the underground channels or karezes that carry water from mountainsides to the farmland in the plain. ADA's work on irrigation combines traditional methods with modern engineering in a way that's appropriate for this land and its people. One of the ADA's most ambitious undertakings has been the rehabilitation of the Spinawala Canal east of Kandahar, which is vital to the grain-producing area of southwest Afghanistan. It had been useless since a flood destroyed its intake in 1980. The reopening of the canal in September 1993 was an occasion to celebrate, and not only for the 600 families who had depended on the 1,200 hectares of land to which the canal had supplied water in the past. When the project was completed, the Spinawala Canal would irrigate twice as much land as it had before the war. The Kandahar authorities had provided the heavy machinery, the local community undertook the cleaning of the side canals, and ADA looked after the rebuilding of the intake and redigging of the main channels. At the celebrations, tribute was paid not only to the project's sponsors, Norwegian Church Aid, Norwegian Refugee Council and Stichting Vluchteling of the Netherlands, but to the spirit of cooperation between the local authorities, the people of the area and ADA. Once the initial cleaning and reconstruction of canals is done, regular cleaning and maintenance work should be a manageable task for the farmers, and with increased farm output, they should be able to meet the routine costs involved. Afghanistan used to be self-sufficient in food. 13 years of war left it dependent on imported foodstuffs to feed most of the surviving population, not to speak of the 6 million refugees as they began flooding back. Even when the irrigation problems are solved, a sustained effort will be needed to make this land as productive as it was. The traditional agriculture has been devastated. Hundreds of thousands of farm animals have been killed, seed varieties have been allowed to degenerate, and orchards have become infested. A far-sighted strategy was required to provide farmers with the means and the knowledge to restore farm output. Encouraging results have already been achieved, but it's vital that the limited resources available continue to be devoted to projects that can be sustained in the long term without external assistance. Village committees have been formed through which ADA's initial assistance to the rural communities is channeled. Aid is always based on the principle of self-help and is made available under clearly defined and accepted conditions. ADA provides improved seed. Farmers return a similar quantity from their first harvest. Fertilizer is sold to the farmers at a reduced price. Agronomists are on hand to provide expert advice, and tractors, threshing machines and other farm machinery are provided. The oxen, with which 90% of farms were tilled before the war, have mostly been killed. It would require 250,000 oxen to supply present needs, so mechanization is a priority. The village committees organize the use of the machinery, making it available to groups of farmers who otherwise couldn't afford to hire it. In keeping with ADA's emphasis on self-reliance, once the equipment is in place, the farmers bear most of the cost of the operation. ADA employs skilled trainers and mechanics to provide instruction in repair and maintenance of the machinery. This not only ensures essential backup services, but also helps to develop small local enterprises. The aim is to provide the kind of assistance that's of lasting benefit and will help the process of rural development long after ADA's direct involvement has ceased. Similarly, in helping to control the pests and diseases that destroy crops, ADA has endeavoured to provide assistance that will be of lasting benefit. 70% of orchards had become infested by the end of the war. Spraying equipment and pesticides have been provided, and farmers trained in safe and environmentally appropriate methods of pest control. The effort has proved to be very successful. To develop the important fruit-growing industry and to promote reforestation, which is another urgent priority, ADA has established nurseries with a capacity to prepare hundreds of thousands of fruit trees and evergreens. By maintaining proper respect for traditions of agriculture, while supplying the benefits of modern technology and research where appropriate, it's hoped that these areas can move back to self-sufficiency in food, and even, eventually, to make southwest Afghanistan a fruit exporting region. Livestock numbers have been halved by the war. In the effort to restore enough meat production to feed the population, veterinary projects are being funded by the UN Development Programme. Thousands of animals have been vaccinated or treated for disease. ADA has trained veterinary workers to meet the basic needs of animal care in these areas. The self-help principle applies. ADA supplies the training, farmers pay for the veterinary medicines, and learn to vaccinate and care for the health of their own livestock. That means independence. Independence is valued by farmers everywhere, and by Afghans in particular. As well as working directly on rehabilitation inside Afghanistan, ADA is investing in the future by assisting 25 Afghan students who are at university in Pakistan, so that they can return equipped with the kind of expert knowledge that's vital to the rebuilding of their country, and which war and emigration have left in short supply. To begin with, ADA didn't set education as one of the priorities for its attention. But as the community's immediate needs were satisfied in irrigation, agriculture, and other areas, the demand for educational facilities became clear. In Khazur-Ozgan, the community themselves decided to open 27 primary schools. They selected the locations and the teachers, and at their request, ADA obtained textbooks from the University of Nebraska. A further step has been to assist in the rebuilding of schools that were destroyed. The community have offered to contribute more to other reconstruction projects so that ADA can devote more of its resources to education. Such growth in the community's awareness of their own needs is a vital part of the development process. The new Jihad, the struggle to rebuild Afghanistan, is being fought against almost impossible odds. During the war, mines were systematically strewn across the country. An estimated 10 million lie unexploded. To clear them from the roads, villages, and farmland will take at least 40 years. As to when the whole country will be cleared, some of the estimates run to thousands of years. The devices, dropped from the air or laid in clusters and minefields, range in size from small devices intended to cripple a person to huge anti-tank mines. 1 out of every 7 Afghans is disabled. Of those, 20%, or 400,000, have been maimed by mines or shells left unexploded after the war. Some of the injured will be supplied with artificial limbs. Most will be left dependent on their families, unable to play their full part in the jihad for reconstruction. Afghans are proud of their refusal ever to be conquered. They believe their resistance to the Red Army played a key role in ending the Cold War. They ask now that the rest of the world, which didn't forget them in time of war, stand by them as Afghanistan's fight for life continues. The task of rebuilding the rural economy is a daunting one, requiring enormous resources. But ADA is determined to keep its eye on the long-term needs of community development. That'll require realism, sound organization, and good planning. It'll also require, for the moment, assistance from abroad. ADA is grateful to donors for their continuing support. As the political and military situation in Afghanistan remains very sensitive, the Afghan Development Association wants to build on the great Afghan tradition of independence, the people's capacity for self-reliance. Poor as these people are, they must be equipped with the resources to become masters of their own destiny.